Hello and welcome back to the KCC channel. I'm Rob and I hope you are having a wonderful day today. Today, I have 5 stories for you from the Malicious Compliance subreddit. Before we start that, just a quick announcement that I have rebranded my 3D printing business. It's now called Dangly 3D, and that's where you can get your 3D printed Carbon Chameleon channel mascot. Check us out at dangly3d.com and follow us on TikTok at dangly3d. On to today's stories, let's jump right in. This story comes to us from Ill Communication 138. You suspended me for 7 days, not 6. Kinda long, but I'll make it as short as possible. So, for context, this happened back in 2015-2016. I'm a single mom, 23 female at the time, and only had a young son to tend to. So, I was waitressing at a restaurant that I will call East End for this story, that was in the heart of the rough area of our town, but a major success due to the support of our community and area-wide parties we were known for throwing. It even resulted in another restaurant being built on the West Coast. However, behind the scenes, our best known secret was that our checks would never clear, and cashing them anywhere was always an issue due to mismanagement of funds. They even put $0 on my W-2 form, even though I put back funds from each supposed check, which I think is illegal. Throughout this, I stayed faithful to them and worked hard almost daily, bringing my son with me from lack of childcare. I even worked an entire month from 9 a.m. to sometimes 3 a.m. I was eventually made top waitress and got a $1.25 raise, which wasn't much on waitress pay, but still, every penny counted. But soon, the owner passed the company down to his son. And when his son took over, everything was okay until he hired 2 employees. I'll call them Tina, an older female, and Leah, an old schoolmate. So over time, I noticed that my boss's son started getting closer to them to a point where they were hanging out after work. Then one day, a meeting occurred to where they were both named managers, even though I had 2 years of seniority and top sales. And my job title and pay raise were both taken. As if that was not heartbreaking enough, my work ethic started getting picked apart by them, especially Tina, who would call me a table hog and not a team player, even though I brought in the most sales. So finally, the last straw came on an event night. I had worked the entire lunch rush that day and was asked to cover the late shift since they knew I knew how to work it. Tina decided to make me the register waitress, meaning I could only work the front bar and door and not take tables. "You made enough money for today," she said with a snark and walked off. Now, my family happened to walk in and requested for me to host their table. There was a rule saying that if a certain worker was requested, that worker would take it, but my manager was upset by this because she had to work front in my place. By the end of the night, she pulled up the computer and the following conversation happens. "What did you do for this table?" Confused and angry. "Who is questioning my orders?" She was taken aback. "I wanted to see if what you did for them was worth being suspended for a week. I had no choice but to work when as a manager I'm supposed to just sit back and observe everything to make sure things go right." Excuse me? You know the rule. But you know what? Whatever. F this. I stormed out in tears. The next day, I go in for my check when I notice on the schedule that I was only suspended for 6 days and scheduled to work on the 7th day for a huge party that was supposed to happen. Cue Malicious Compliance. I went directly to the boss and told him I thought I was suspended for 7 days, not 6, and had plans for that day, which I didn't. My boss saw this and pointed it out to Tina, who had no choice but to enforce my suspension. That night, I drove by and the streets were packed. I blew the horn and waved. The staff told me that due to poor planning of suspension of her best server and being short-staffed, she struggled to find coverage and was yelled at by the boss for her poor leadership, and she had to work it herself. I found a job that week and quit, and told them that my 2 weeks notice was when they would notice I wasn't coming back. Jumping down to the comment section on this one, there's one from a user called Just Shogun. It says, "How does restaurant management attract the most garbage humans? I've known a lot of restaurant managers, and the majority of them were just not good people. Even the good ones were still kinda crappy in some way or another. Another user down below called Captain Earnubs said, "This is kinda heartbreaking. Opie has the character and ambition to be much more, perhaps even run her own restaurant if she chose. Instead, she kept the place running when it clearly needed to be closed down, and something better built on its place. There will always be evil people in places of power, but they don't have to stay there. It just takes the courage to say no." I understand what the commenter's trying to say here, but in some cases, it's really hard to say no to management, especially when you need the job to pay your bills. That's why a lot of people allow themselves to be walked all over, because if they don't allow them to be walked all over, they go home with no money, and maybe lose their house or don't get to eat that week. I mean, there's a whole lot of things going on here in the background that we just don't know about for most people. This story comes to us from A Quiet Borderline. "What are you going to do about it? Call the cops?" I was explaining to my mom what malicious compliance was, and she reminded me of this story. I was a senior in high school when all of a sudden, I got sick at school and had to be sent home. Because my car was in the shop, Mom had to come get me. It's about 9:30 a.m. when this happened. As we're driving up a very busy street, we see two 7 to 8-year-old kids, we'll call them Frank and Zelda, trying to cross. Worried, Mom pulls over to see what's going on. The conversation went roughly as follows. "Kids, are you guys okay? What are you two doing here? Dr. Idiot said we couldn't come to school early, so he sent us home." Now, Mom is very familiar with Dr. Idiot. He was the principal at the elementary school my younger brother was attending at the time. My brother, Mark, was going through some behavioral issues at the time, and Mom was commonly called to the office, to the point they were on a first name basis. Not that he allowed her to use his first name because "I have a doctorate in education, so it's Dr. Idiot." So, in other words, he was an entitled idiot. There was a gas station 10 feet away, so Mom tells Frank and Zelda to meet us there. We pulled in, got some water for the kids as it was a hot day, and Mom calls Dr. Idiot's cell phone. Again, the conversation went roughly as follows. "This is Dr. Idiot. Hi, this is Mark's mom. I have two kids here named Frank and Zelda, and they say they were sent home early. Yes, their parents dropped them off at 6 a.m. because they had to work. Something about mandatory overtime. Of course, we're not a daycare, so I just told the kids to go home and wait for the bus." Are you kidding me? We're 5 miles away from the school. They walked all that way. It's a wonder they weren't hit by a car or kidnapped. "What are you gonna do about it? Call the cops?" Click. Mom was absolutely floored, but she decided to give Dr. Idiot a nice dose of reality. At the time, we lived in a small town. How small? So small that sometimes the chief of police would have to walk the beat. And that day, he happened to be a block or so away from the gas station. When he got the call, he arrived, got the whole story from not only Frank and Zelda, but from Mom and me. And being a father of 2 elementary-aged kids himself, he was pissed. He looked at Mom and said, "It's time I had some words with Dr. Idiot." The chief of police drove Frank and Zelda to the school in the squad car, which they were super excited about, personally escorted them to their class, and then marched to Dr. Idiot's office and proceeded to tear him a new butthole, telling Dr. Idiot that he'd help the parents press charges on him for child endangerment, among other things. From that day on, Dr. Idiot allowed Frank and Zelda to be at the school early on the days their parents had mandatory overtime. Update. So I got some details from Mom about why Frank and Zelda were just dropped off at school. Their aunt works at the elementary school and had agreed to watch them until school started a couple of hours later. She wasn't on the clock. Frank and Zelda didn't live in a good part of town, and their parents, understandably, didn't feel their kids would be safe if they were alone. If Dr. Idiot had driven them home to wait for the bus, it wouldn't have gotten on the chief of police's nerves. Update 2. As for why the aunt didn't see the kids, the parents dropped the kids off 10 minutes before the aunt arrived, and Dr. Idiot assured them that he'd watch the kids for the 10 minutes. Once they were gone, he told the kids to scram. When the aunt got there, she came in a different direction so she didn't see them. He told her that the kids hadn't been dropped off. Since they were at work and work wasn't great about cell phone usage, she had no way to reach them to confirm that. She had no freaking clue what really happened until the chief of police turned up with the kids in tow. And yes, I have no idea how Dr. Idiot kept his job. Jumping down to the comment section on this one, there's one from a user called Precious Body Parts. It says, "Beautiful malicious compliance. It's always funny to me when someone does something crappy and casually suggests that the other party call the cops. It's like they think that surely nobody would ever dare to do such a thing." On one note, this principal reminds me of one that I had back in high school. He would flip his crap if you called him Mr. I got my doctorate, you call me doctor. I would call him Mr. just to rile him up over and over and over. I was a little craphead in school, just saying. It really makes me wonder how an educator, especially a principal, would send kids to walk home that early in the morning. That early in the morning, there's a ton of traffic. People getting to work, people going to school, everybody's up and around and moving about, and that could be very dangerous for those kids. I don't really think this should be up to the parents whether he gets charged with child endangerment or not. I think the police should put that charge on him for sure. At the very bare minimum, there needs to be a police report, and this needs to be reported to their Ministry of Education so that that principal can be removed from the school. This story comes to us from KG Capybara. Decorate instead of doing my work? Sure. Several years ago, I was working for an organization, and they were having their annual holiday decorating competition between the different departments. There were a couple of departments that basically took turns winning every year because a few of the staff there went absolutely nutty with decorating. The departments gave a little budget towards this event, but a few staffers from those two departments put in their own money on top of the department funds and just created some insane over-the-top displays. I saw pics for a few years. Some of them were very cool, but also probably took a few staffers a few days to set up, and probably cost at least $500 or more for decorations. That's not counting the staff hours that went into it. So my department had its own new office that year. In previous years, we had been in a small area behind another department. Some people didn't even know we were there. But that year, we were in a nice office space and on the ground floor. So my executive director decides we are going to compete. I think she just wanted to show off to her boss. So she tells me, "OP, since you'll be in the office working this weekend, you can make a good start on decorating the office for the competition." I'll be in the office this weekend, but that's because I'll be working on these projects. Remember, we need to be in a good place with these projects before the new year. Well, no reason you can't do both. Spend a few hours decorating and the rest working. I had only planned to be in the office about 4 to 5 hours anyway, so a few hours decorating wouldn't leave me much time to devote to the projects. I'd like to get these projects to a good place before our holiday. I'm also not much of a decorator. This is actually true. I moved 14 times in about 17 years. I think it killed any desire I may have had to decorate. And I'm a tomboy, not very feminine in how I dress or present myself, which I think always bothered Boss Lady and not very good with decorating. Are you refusing to help your coworkers with this? Note, refusing to help coworkers was a phrase she pulled out anytime someone pushed back on her ideas. She came from the business world to a different industry and wanted to incorporate business ideas that didn't always work. Nope, I'll try to spend some time decorating then. That weekend, I stopped at a dollar store and bought several rolls of wrapping paper, put it on the department credit card. When I went into the office, I spent about 2 or 3 hours wrapping everything I could think of that was a stable object. Wrapped most of our desks, our filing cabinets, some bookshelves, some end tables we had in the front office area, basically making them unusable. Someone would have to break through the wrapping paper and ruin the decoration to get into their desk, or the filing cabinets, or the bookshelves. Everyone spent the next week not being able to functionally do some of their work because they couldn't get into their desk or filing cabinet. Our office had a very easy week right before the holiday. We didn't even place in the competition. And I heard Boss Lady got scolded the next month by her boss because we were behind on the projects. Jumping down to the comment section on this one, there's one from a user called Night Manager. It says, "I'm sorry, I thought filling the toner cartridges with glitter would make for a very decorative workplace. Which ones? Oh, I filled all of them, of course." OP responded to this one and said, "This made me laugh out loud, thank you." OP, you tried to explain to your boss that you had a bunch of work to do and you needed to get it done. This boss just screams to me of somebody who doesn't understand the work of the people who work for them. And we go back to what I say all the time on this channel. If you haven't done a job or you don't understand how to do a job, how can you manage it effectively? It sounds like your boss doesn't know what's going on in your department, because a good boss would say, hey, they want to get their work done? That's great. Leave them to it. This story comes to us from A Quiet Borderline. The boss wants me to stand in the corner? Okay. Years ago, I was a photographer at a major theme park and worked with the characters on an almost daily basis. Our famous character is a mouse that owns the whole park. Everyone who worked there either referred to him as Boss or Mr. Mouse around guests. For the purposes of this post, I'll refer to him as Boss. One morning, I was assigned to work with the boss. He was in a mischievous mood and being an overall goofball. I enjoyed this, and so did our guest and character attendants. One of his favorite things to do when he was in a mischievous mood was try to pass me the autograph books he had signed, conveniently ignoring the fact that I had my hands full with the camera. As I went to take them, he dropped them and run away, making a laughing motion. So we're with this family, and Boss does his usual pass the autograph books to the photographer stunt. He holds them out expectantly, and I say, "I'd love to, boss, but you know I don't know my ABCs. At this, the boss drops the books, takes my hand, moves me to a corner, and points to the floor, telling me to stay like I was a naughty child. Malicious compliance mode activated. Okay, I guess I'm grounded, I said, pouting. Everyone at this point is howling with laughter, even our head manager Diane, who had stepped in to watch. So, Boss continues his interaction with the family. Now, at the end of the session, we have the family pose with the character. So, Boss gets everyone together and poses with the popular ta-da, except there's no photographer. After a moment, the boss motions the family to wait and stomps over to my corner. I'm fighting back a grin at this point as he turns me around, points to my camera, and then held his hands up as if to say, "What gives?" "Boss, you told me I'm grounded, remember?" I said with a sweet, innocent smile. It's at this point Diane pipes in with, "That you did, Mr. Mouse." Boss playfully drags me back to my spot and poses again. We get the photo and send the family on their way. Diane stepped out with them and offered to send them through again to get more pictures because I didn't take that many on account of me being grounded. The family accepted, although the dad, who had tears in his eyes at this point, said it was the hardest he'd laughed in a long time. To this day, it still brings a smile to my face. Jumping down the comment section on this one, there's one from a user called Timanthius. It says, "And that's why people go to these parks and pay the god-awful prices. They make you feel good." Walt was a con man, but he found a con that works for everyone. Yeah, I don't know about a con man, but he was definitely a very successful businessman, I can tell you that for sure. One of the most recognized companies in the world, bar none. Yeah, I'd say that he was pretty accomplished. I absolutely loved this whole interaction because it was like improv on the spot and made people happy in the process. OP, you played along with this very, very well, and honestly, the boss played along really well as well. It sounds like you guys had a really good dynamic going, and that is all you really need to make a really fun workplace. This story comes to us from Throwaway574333. Threatened to take my cats? Lose $80,000. How it started. Early in my teens, I tumbled into a deep depression and struggled for a long time. Around 8 years ago, after I broke through my depression, thanks to therapy and medication, I also figured out I am transgender. Fast forward half a year, I met my now ex, let's call them X. Within the first week of dating, I poured everything out. I told X I wasn't ready to socially transition at all. Mind you, I only recently got a decent paying job, still lived with my parents, etc. X seemed very supportive and assured me they have no problem whatsoever with me being who I am. And so 4 years passed when we finally decided to buy a house together. X's parents, however, were loaded, and they made a nice donation to X by splitting up their savings between siblings when we told them about our plans. At this point, we also discussed that if things were to go sideways, we'd just friendly part ways and split everything back to each other's original investment. We made some offers and ended up buying a nice place in between our two places of work. Since I had a car, commuting for me was easy, but for X, it was more difficult. They had to take public transport every day for 1 hour there and 1 hour back. Out of the frying pan, into the fire. We adopted 2 cats as we were both animal people and COVID just hit, so I wouldn't feel so lonely when working from home while X was out working on site. However, the high I was riding of finally being independent and being able to live my own life was short-lived. See, my job requires me to be on call for several days of the month, usually 7, 14 if a colleague is ill. My phone would ring in the middle of the night, waking us both up. We never really argued before, but I recall this as the breaking moment. X started acting in a way that I'd already seen before in my parental home. In situations like this, I learned that agreeing is usually the quickest way to end confrontation. And so I slept on the couch not even a month after moving into my own house. Things escalated from there. After a few more months, I was doing all the work around the home. I was the only one caring for the cats. If I didn't do it, nobody would. Besides that, I wasn't free to be who I wanted. I received mean comments when I did something gender affirming, for example, a new haircut. Note that at this point, I was not ready to come out yet. I created an entire plan and timeline for myself. 2022. During the course of 2022, X did their best to keep me down, but I wouldn't let them. At some point, X decided it would be easier to give up. We had a talk where we agreed we'd mutually break up and divide everything fairly. I had every intention to keep the house, as my cats got used to it. I made some friends in the area, and my work was relatively close. As X had no intention to keep the house, commuting to work while their parents lived in the town they worked in, we went on from the assumption that I would keep the house. One evening, somewhere in November last year, we had an argument over the money that I'd have to pay them. It started small, as X had listed a broken vacuum cleaner on the list of items, and I started asking questions if we could scrap it. The argument evolved, and X threatened to take my cats from me as part of the deal. This was the hill I was willing to die on. Never threaten to take away my cats. I stopped arguing and started calling a friend, as I needed some support. X knocked my phone out of my hands, picked up their phone, called their parents, and put them on speakerphone. The words X spoke will haunt me forever. OP is trans and wants to be a insert gender. My first instinct I won't share, but you can imagine. After calling a helpline, I calmed down and gathered my courage and called up everybody I could think of and told them. I wasn't going to let X win this one. An hour after X's initial phone call, their dad showed up and started threatening lawyers and spouting things like that I was mentally ill, I would never be a insert gender, and that they would do whatever it cost to get the house from me or leave me with as little as possible. Malicious compliance time. Fast forward a week or so, X sent over a new version of the proposed financial resolution. The amount that I had to pay X was increased by a significant amount. I wanted this to be over quickly, so I just agreed, as long as X would cover the costs of the notary, as their amount was the maximum I could borrow from the bank. They did not know this. X did not agree and hiked their price again, stating that if I don't agree, the price will just continue to go up. X made an entire Excel spreadsheet detailing their investment as well as mine. What I noticed was that in the Excel, everything was tied together. If X hiked their price, the price to buy me out was getting hiked as well. And that's when I realized I had them by the balls. See, they were blindsided and thought I would do anything to not move to my parents. I argued back and forth and played dumb at one point just to drive up the price. The email stated that X forgot to calculate how much more the house was worth now than 2 years ago, and hiked the price by 20%. As per usual, X copy-pasted their calculations and said, "This is the price you pay me," or "This is the price I pay you." And that's when I took my chance. I agreed to let X buy me out for the amount specified, and in my reply, also stated that all previous negotiations of who pays the notary would also be valid, the buyer. I ended my email with, "I don't have to remind you that an agreement over email is just as valid as a contract." I pushed them to contact a notary within a reasonable time, or I would seek legal counsel to force them to pay my share. Fast forward 2 weeks, and I receive a call from the notary that they are working on the deed and need my details. Approximately a month later, it would be ready to sign. I double-checked the numbers, it was all there, and shortly after, it was signed. The reason I'm posting this now instead of at the end of 2022 is because, like I said, X didn't want to keep the house. It went up for sale immediately, approximately 40,000 euros above market value. I had the house favorited and checked periodically. Every so often, it would drop in price and receive the new sticker on the website. It dropped approximately 60,000 euros before yesterday in total, when it was finally sold. I calculated the damages based on their handy Excel sheet, and if we assume the initial fair split like we agreed 3 to 4 years ago, my ex lost about 40,000 euros of their own investment, not only in buying me out, but notary costs, taxes, etc. If we assume the split I initially agreed on to get it over with, my ex lost out on 80,000 euros. I am now living my life to the fullest with friends and an amazing partner who is truly supportive. Lesson learned, however, I bought a new place for myself, funded by X. I will never share ownership of ever again. Jumping down to the comment section on this one, there's one from a user called Eat More Artichokes. It says, "That was great. Cats are okay, I assume?" OP responded and said, "Yes, they're with me in the new place, doing much better than before. Completely stress-free. They even stopped clawing the curtains." OP, I'm glad you and the cats are in a better place now. It's very true that cats can definitely sense your stress, and I think it actually stresses them out a bit too. So that might have something to do with the clawing part. It's interesting to me that your ex wasn't really comfortable with the idea of you transitioning, so why did they buy a house with you? That seems a little bit off. I don't think they did some very good planning there. Now, OP did mention in another comment that it was kind of like a sunk cost fallacy for the ex in this case, because it was their longest relationship yet and they didn't want to be alone. So I guess that kind of makes sense. But let's be honest here, if you're not going to be comfortable with somebody in the long run, then you need to do what's best for you and get out of that situation. Because in that situation, it's not just what's best for you, it's what's best for both of you. That way, OP could have just moved on right away and been with somebody who appreciated them for who they were.